good.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Microsoft Graph session. Welcome to Ignite. Thank you so much for being here early in the morning. My name is Nina Arenas. I'm a program manager on the Microsoft 365 core team, and I'm joined here today by Mr. Jeremy Fake.
That's right, so Jeremy Fake. I'm a senior PM on the Graph team working for Yina. And we've got some really great demos today, and we'll be able to start bang on the 9. So I would ask if you can sit in the middle here, because our room is certainly a little bit over expectation. Don't be shy, those guys in the corner, if you want to just creep over a little bit, that'd be great. Because otherwise I'm going to be presenting to Safeline all day, and that is probably not going to be the best view for me. I need some other faces to get in front.
Great. So today, we're going to get started. Okay, so this is the agenda for the session today. We're going to talk about Microsoft Graph, why it's important, and why it's important for you as a developer or as an IT administrator. Before we go forward, I wanted just to show of hands, how many developers do we have in the room? Great. How many IT pros?
Awesome.
Okay. Thank you for that. Then we're going to go straight ahead into what are the new things that we're announcing for Ignite. We continue to improve and add more features and more data sets to the API every now and then, coming from many different teams across the company. So we're going to talk about what are those new features. We're going to tell you and show you how to get started on the set of tooling that we have available for developers. And then we're going to go straight into demos. Like half of the session is going to be packed on demos from different things that we have across partners and some of the demos showing up technologies that they're part of the Microsoft Graph. And finally, we're going to talk about what are some of the next steps for you to take away as follow-ups from this session. So let's get started. Why Microsoft Graph is important, and what is Microsoft Graph? So for those of you who are not familiar, Microsoft Graph is the gateway to your data in the Microsoft Cloud. If you're a customer of Microsoft, whether that is on the consumer side of the world with a Hotmail account, at Outlook.com or at Live.com account, or if you're an enterprise customer with Office 365, Microsoft 365, EMS, or any of the Windows 10 services, then you have data in Microsoft Graph. And it allows you as a developer to build a wide range of experiences accessing that data into the API. So it's basically a REST API follows very standardized formats and aggregates data across all of these different services in the Microsoft Cloud, allowing you to easily develop applications, whether that's mobile applications, web applications, native apps, background service daemon processes, bots, you name it. Whatever type of integration you're building with our services, you will find data in the Microsoft Graph that brings you all of these different context about the user. And it all starts with the Microsoft identity. Who is the user within our cloud? What is the content that they have across all of these different services? And what is the set of deep insights and real-time updates that the users have, users, groups, and organizations have in our services? So in a nutshell, it gives you access to all the data across Microsoft 365, whether that is services in Office 365, like SharePoint, Exchange, Azure Active Directory, OneNote, Planner, Excel, and so forth. Windows 10 with the Windows Activity Timeline, Device Relay, some of the notifications that you can send out across devices. EMS with Identity Protection, Azure Active Directory is part of EMS as well, and security, and all of these different set of services, all of your data across one single API endpoint. It supports all type of users, whether those users are consumer or enterprise or educational users. And from a developer perspective, is one way to access that. One SDK, one auth endpoint, one set of documentation that you can just use. And the investments that you have to learn about this technology are just going to continue. If you invest the time to learn this technology to integrate with one product, you're just done a huge going forward in order to integrate with other products as part of the Microsoft Cloud. And it is the core foundation to the Microsoft 365 platform. We build our own services using the graph. And we want you to build these services, the services that extend Microsoft 365 experiences using the graph as well. Whether that's integrating with our core apps, like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, through document integration, or with conversations in Outlook and Teams, or with pages in SharePoint, with the timeline in Windows. All of these are canvases that you can integrate with, accessing data into the Microsoft Graph and showing up your integrations into our first-party experiences. And then in addition to that, you can also build your own experiences, whether, as I was mentioning before, web applications or device applications, and so forth. And for those of you who are part of an ISV that are not necessarily working for your own enterprise, the opportunity for integrating with our platform is actually quite high. We have more than 90% of Fortune 500 companies with data in Microsoft Graph. Those are all customers, Office or Microsoft 365 customers. That's more than 135 million active users across 181 countries. That's a ton of people. That's a lot of people that you can become your target addressable market when you integrate with our platform. Okay, so that's going to wrap up. Hold on. Again, I'm moving here. It's not moving the slides. Technical glitch. There you go. So that wraps up what is Microsoft Graph, why is it important for you. I hope you get an idea. REST endpoint, you can get access to all of this data. Now we're going to go straight into what are the things that we're announcing for Ignite 2018. Before I talk about what are we announcing, I just wanted to make sure that we have a little bit of a point of view on what is available today. So I talked about Office 365, Windows 10, and EMS. And actually, one of the announcements is we're welcoming Dynamics as well as part of the Microsoft 365 family. So we have now Business Central Financials APIs as part of the Microsoft Graph. And then in the back, I have some of the most important data sets that we have as part of the API. So whether it is mail, calendar, contacts, tasks, sites from SharePoint, lists, drives, files, and all of these different entities are today part of the graph. This is only Dynamics is the one thing that is new here on this slide. And then in terms of announcements, we're going to break it in three. We're going to talk about what are the new data sets. And when I talk about a data set, I mean a set of resource of data that is available in the API, like a message, or like a calendar invite, or like a file in SharePoint. Then we're going to talk about what are the capabilities that are new. Capabilities, I mean, what are those sort of tools that allow you to build the integrations, things like webhooks or Delta Query that allow you to optimize your applications. And then we're going to talk about the client libraries and what is the set of libraries that we have available on a wide range of platforms that you can use depending on what your preference is. So let's get started with the data sets. So first of all, these are all announcements for the conference and a little bit of what's coming in within the next 3 to 6 months. In Office 365, we're taking to V1 endpoint, which is, the graph today has two endpoints, one V1, which is generally available, and it's ready for you to use in your production applications. And it has a beta endpoint, which is where we preview all of the new APIs, and they eventually graduate to V1. So from the Office 365 perspective, we have mail tips coming from Exchange, preview and follow documents coming from OneDrive and SharePoint, device configuration coming from AAD, and alerts from the security APIs. Alerts is a set of APIs that we launched at Build this year, which aggregates data across the alerts, security alerts that are generated within Microsoft and across other third parties as well. And in preview, we have a lot of features, like get free BC data. Previously, we had APIs that enable you to pass a set of users and do all of the scheduling for you, but we got a lot of feedback that also getting to the right raw free BC data was important for certain scenarios, so we're enabling that API as well. Adding internet headers to the messages, to mail messages, sharing links in SharePoint, followed content, pages, and list views, Like these are like the fact that we're making progress on the SharePoint APIs is huge for me. So like, don't miss the SharePoint session where Jeremy Kelly is going to go deep on do a whole bunch of demos on the SharePoint APIs that are coming in from Graph. As I mentioned before, we have the Business Central, the financials APIs from Dynamics 365, and we have also several features coming in from EMS, from Active Directory, like the set of risky users, sign-in, access review, from Teams. Oh, the Teams is not actually, there's a bug in the slide. Teams is not actually part of EMS, it's part of Office 365, and we didn't notice that. So we have a lot of APIs from Teams coming in as well, creating tabs, calling API. Actually, this one is pretty cool because you can create a bot that then calls certain members into a specific like meeting room in Teams. Imagine like you want to create a war room session where you need to bring in people in a certain point in time, and like you can just federate the requests to call all of those people and get them in, all of those persons and get them into the meeting. It's pretty cool. We're going to show it a little bit. Being able to use app-only context with the Teams APIs is also part of it, and all of the classroom creation for the EDU scenarios. We're also adding Secure Score for the security set of APIs, and then later on throughout the year, we've been working very hard on the application API. The application API from AAD is the foundation for what we, like for the application model, the fact that in order to access data in our cloud, you have to create an application. And today we have a set of interfaces, user experiences that allow you to create that. I'm going to talk about how we're evolving those user experiences. And the evolution of that user experiences also take the foundation of this application API. And then additional functionality on Exchange with MIME content on messages.
And so as well as the data sets, there's also the underlying capabilities of the graph. And so some of the things we're shipping into V1 this week, or just actually if you'd have noticed that have actually shipped a little bit earlier than Ignite, are things like the ability to do the Delta queries on the Active Directory users and groups. And along with other Delta queries we've already had existing in the process. And one of the things I noticed when talking to the booth yesterday was people weren't aware of this concept and were querying the graph with date ranges to get the changes from the last time their timer job or service job was running. The Delta query allows you to kind of query what's changed since the last time I did things in a way that's a lot more efficient than kind of putting date ranges around particular queries. So if you aren't aware of the Delta query and you're doing that kind of lookup already, I definitely encourage you guys to check out the Delta queries that are available. In addition to that, there are now webhooks that are available that will notify you when things like Active Directory users and groups are either created, modified, or deleted that have been in beta for a while now and flicking over to that V1 general availability endpoint. And a big announcement today, which we're going to talk about after this section of the presentation, is a new feature called the Microsoft Graph Data Connect, which I'll let Yina explain, then we're going to do a cool demo of what that allows us to do. And you see there is that with this journey moving from kind of introducing things in beta where we want feedback from you into V1, there's some new Delta query capabilities that are available on things like the apps, the service principals, and the directory roles, so that you as either a developer or an IT pro can come in here and query those things in the API very easily to see what's changed since a particular date. And another demo we're going to do today, so I'm not going to jump too deep on this hit right now, is Project Roam, which is the ability for you as developers to be able to push notifications directly to a multitude of the user's devices. We'll show this demo, and that's why we have this machine up on stage that shows how cool that can be as a feature directly off the graph to all the authenticated users in your business or customers of people that your products are built on top of. And then one thing that didn't quite make it for Ignite, but is definitely coming by the end of the year, because it was meant to be shipped for Ignite, is the webhooks. And where we're actually going is having richer webhooks. So right now, when you call and subscribe to a webhook, when something like a change happens in a team creation or a message creation, right now, all you get back is the ID of the message or the channel. What will actually come back with rich webhooks is the information you would likely have got by going and grabbing that ID and doing another fetch to the message to find out what the body of the message is or what the name of the team that was created was. So it's one less hop you have to do with a rich notification, which I think will be a much better bonus in that side. And then in addition to the data sets and the capabilities, the other aspect here is the SDKs. So we have a plethora of SDKs that are already available for the various different languages here. When I joined only a few months ago, so I'm very new to this team, Daryl Miller also joined the team and has been very focused since he's come on board on SDKs. So the Graph team is super lucky to have Daryl really focused on this. And so essentially what we're doing is we have these things that are already in V1 for the major platforms and some things in preview we're still waiting for feedback for on the SDKs. One thing I know you've all been waiting for is the TypeScript types. So that gives you the ability to have all those POCO objects for the .NET people in the room strongly typed inside of JavaScript to make it a lot easier when you go call the graph in JavaScript and bring back the objects and have those in a strongly typed way in the TypeScript world. And so where we're trying to get to with the SDKs is essentially being a little bit more responsive and on a regular cadence in terms of versioning. And so there's been a lot of work being done by the SDK engineering team to actually do this in a continuous integration approach. So you can expect on a regular cadence when those SDKs will be updated. And obviously there will be some times where maybe a service lands at a particular place that's not within that cadence that we may push out an earlier build so you can get to those things on the SDK earlier. But one of the big features we know you've all been asking for is the ability to have a beta SDK. So some of my demos today, we're not using the SDK because I'm showing off all the new beta APIs. So we kind of built our own layer to call to the graph. The idea being is that with the SDKs, you'll be able to call those beta objects or beta, depending on what part of the world you're from, to call into the graph.
I would just like to know, of a show of hands, how many people use client libraries where they're developing versus just using plain REST?
This is where audience participation is required. Okay.
Thank you.
And so with that, some of the more flexible aspects of the SDK is that you won't have to use every part of the stack of the SDK. So if you just wanted to use certain parts and you've built your own things on top, you'll be able to pick and choose which parts of the framework that you require to give you that level of flexibility in what you're doing. So maybe you just want to take our auth layer with the MSAL libraries, and you want to take a part of the HTTP request stack, but then you want to build on top of that yourself rather than using what we provide. You'll be able to do that with a new waiver architecture in the SDKs. So with that, all of that is wrapped up in a nice Microsoft Graph blog, which I'll show you in a moment of where that lives, as well as some videos there where we've shown all these different features we've been announcing in the last year, along with the change log, which I noticed Victor didn't highlight yesterday that it's actually disappeared off the top navigation. We will fix that. It will be back. But the change log is where you can see all the changes that happen directly on the service of the Microsoft Graph. And then in addition to that, we also do a monthly community call where we get PMs to present on the graph. And we also get community people, MVPs, regional directors, to present what they've been doing and building and using with the graph as well. So if you aren't on the Microsoft Graph call, Yina's going to show you a demo in a moment of how you can actually get that added to your calendar.
Indeed.
I feel like you're in the, it's not working with you in the way. There you go.
The way. Okay, so that's it for what's Microsoft Graph, what's new for Ignite. Now we're going to tell you how to get started. And it's actually very simple. You know, just go to graph.microsoft.com. You're going to land in our developer portal, where you're going to be able to try the API using the Graph Explorer. You're going to be able to learn using our documentation and then get deep into it with all of the tutorials, code samples, and set of content that we have for you to just get up and running.
Yeah, and one of the big bits of feedback we had was we had some training labs that have been around for a long time for Microsoft Graph that a lot of people weren't aware of. And when I came on board, it became very obvious that that was the case. And so we've made a slight tweak for Ignite on the Graph website where you still have your beloved Graph Explorer, which we can tell from our analytics is the most popular thing on this website, which Yina's going to demonstrate in a moment. But you also now have kind of a different pivot on how we work. And so if I go in here and look at how we get started as an ASP.NET developer, we have our quick starts here, which is essentially to get a project running on your machine in 2 minutes. and I'll show that in a second. But also we have this ability to jump into our labs. Now, there was an announcement from Microsoft Learning today that is basically going to give you more structured learning with badges and awards and some kind of course outline to get the idea of how you can start building with the graph. But this lab will walk you through from scratch, file new Visual Studio project, registering the application, all the way through to adding the MCell libraries directly into your project, and then adding the Microsoft Graph SDKs and making your call. And so that's something end-to-end a developer can do on their own following the steps, and we provide all the screenshots so you can see exactly what you're doing across the different lab platforms. So if you're looking to kind of get started, those kind of things are things that people with very little developer experience can follow with an ID and get running and calling to the graph. And we also provide here all the ASP.NET samples and so forth. So we're just experimenting here to see whether this is a better view for you, depending on what platform you're on. And as we go through, we will add more platforms here and more samples and more training specific to those particular platforms. And then from the quick start perspective, we go into here. Essentially what this does is we have an example project, and we take the hassle out of going through and registering the application, getting the application ID, and putting that into the project. And we'll actually register the application ID as the user account you're logged into here, and then you'll download that zip file and run it locally on your machine. And so the quick start's a great way to kind of get started if you don't have the 20 to 25 minutes to follow that lab end to end with a file new project. So I'd encourage you either this week or maybe when you get back to base and caught up your email to have a crack at the getting started, quick start, and then have a look at following one of those labs through to get your first graph calls done in whatever language that you're comfortable in doing. And so, do you want to show what the Graph Explorer is? Because everyone seems to understand how popular that is from a way to kind of demonstrate the graph.
Absolutely. So just, again, show of hands, how many people have already played with the Graph Explorer? Awesome. So I'm going to make this short and sweet. You're already familiar. You can log in with your personal account, with your enterprise account, or with a demo account that we offer. Here we're logged in with our alter ego, Ali, and I'm just going to run the /me query. So that /me query is going to bring me a set of basic profile properties for this particular user. One of the things that I've heard multiple times is like, oh, if you make this query on beta, you get more properties. So it means that beta has additional set of data that V1 does not have. And I just want to debunk that myth. That is not true. It is that for V1, we're optimizing the set of data that you get over the wire. And the way to get all of that data in the V1 endpoint that is exposed in beta is to just use the select clause. So you can just say select, and for example, display name, and for example, about me. And then you're going to get, well, this person has not
She's been a bad corporate citizen.
About who she is on the tenant. But you're going to get specifically those set of properties that you're asking for. So it's not that those properties are not exposed in V1. It is that we want you to make optimized queries, and the default payload that we send over, it's going to be just basic profile feature properties. So we talked about the set of data sets that are in the graph. One of the things that I wanted to show is like all of these set of examples that are available here for all of the different set of data sets that are part of the graph, whether it is users, groups, mail, calendar, contacts, and so forth, all of the different set of examples. And I'm going to focus on calendar for a minute because Jeremy mentioned that we have a monthly Microsoft Graph community call. It happens every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific time.
First Tuesday of every month, not every Tuesday.
Oh my gosh, did I say every Tuesday? Yes, first Tuesday of every month.
Yina is announcing every Tuesday.
Yeah. And we just added sample to the Microsoft Graph that you can come in here to add the community call to your calendar. So you just log in here and come in and make a post request. For those of you who don't know, Microsoft Graph not only allows you to read data, but also allows you to create content. So right here, this one in this tab, we have Ali's calendar. Their next Microsoft Graph community call is on October 2nd. So we're going to go back to the Graph Explorer. And we're going to send over this request, which has the subject, body, and start and date time. And notice that this is a recurrent meeting. So it's another thing that you can do with a calendar API, not just create a single event, but create a recurrent meeting. So we're going to run this query and go back to the calendar. And what we're going to see here is the Microsoft Graph community call showing up on Ali's calendar. So one of the takeaways for you today, go to Graph Explorer, run this query, and add the community call to your calendar, so we can see you every month, not every week, every month, the first Tuesday of every month in the community call. So I'm not going to, since a lot of the folks in the audience are very familiar with Graph Explorer, I'm not going to go deeper into this. The key takeaway is it's an easy tool for you to make queries. So when you're developing your application, you can come here, make the requests, see what you get back and forth from the data, and then go back to your code and continue with your development process. It's a very easy tool and gives you all of these different samples and points right into the documentation for them.
One other thing just to bear in mind, we see a lot of support questions on Stack Overflow where they see, for instance, where I'm adding the add graph community call. It's going to go over to the documentation there and show me that we're using this create event aspect. And you'll actually see what permissions are required from the graph to actually do that creation here. So you can see here in this case it's calendar read write. When I'm in the Graph Explorer interface, I can actually go through and modify the permissions that the Graph Explorer has as me logged in as the Ali, which is the admin of this particular account. And so you can see here that I've already got and have consented the calendar.readWrite. So often when you get permission errors in the Graph Explorer, it's essentially because you don't have the correct permissions there, and that's why you need to go to that modify thing. But the ability to be able to see all those different samples, and you'll see there's a bunch of things we're demoing today which are appearing in here, like the security APIs and the user activities and notifications APIs, that allows you to go through and really kind of explore and troubleshoot something maybe you have in code just to make sure it actually works for your tenant and for your user in the Graph Explorer. And honestly, a lot of the times on Stack Overflow, once they see it's not working in the Graph Explorer, they realize, oh, there's something I'm not correctly doing in the formation of the body of the JSON that I'm posting through because they're not using the SDK, and that's why they're getting the error in their own particular code. So this is a great way to kind of get to the troubleshooting aspect. Now, I showed you documentation there. I think the biggest bit of feedback I've got after joining and kind of disclosing that now I'm kind of owning the graph from a developer experience perspective is our docs could do with a little bit of work. And especially for developers that are working with other parts of Microsoft, they would have already been on the docs.microsoft.com platform, which is kind of a shared resource that we have across Microsoft. And so what I wanted to do is just preview that we are actually getting to the point of having the Microsoft Graph docs on this new platform. And one of the demos I'm going to do later on is essentially using the Intune APIs. Now with the current experience, it's actually quite hard to go and find exactly what you want without actually using Bing to do a search against our documentation. So we're well aware of this. But just as an example here, if I go in and type remote lock in my table of contents, it's immediately going through and filtering my API documents directly down to the ones that are relevant, and then I can jump into that thing and see exactly what's going on and what I need to do and the examples of how I can call that remote locking API. So, and then the other aspect is we can switch over to the beta here very quickly, so it's also very clear what version of the documentation you're using. We're not quite there yet. But we are getting very, very close to having that. So I just wanted to kind of show that because I know there's actually been a lot of people going over to the booth and asking those things. So keep an eye on our blog because we will be announcing that by the end of the year.
Another one of the things that we usually see is people getting stuck on auth. So I wanted to spend some time talking about what is needed to get, oh, let me just, yeah, there. What is needed in order to get access to the API? So if you've been developing for a while, Microsoft Graph uses Auth 2.0, and you need to present an access token in order to get access to that data. In order to get that access token, the user needs to consent to the application for that delegated access. whether it is a user that is, whether it is that the app is acting on behalf of the user or the app acting on its own. There's no other way in which you can get access to the graph. The graph does not support basic authentication. It only supports Auth 2.0. And for those of you IT admins on the crowd, like this is actually like built-in security in the API. Like what you had before was users giving away their username and passwords for applications that were accessing and interacting with their data. With Auth 2.0, what you can do is you can restrict exactly what the users are giving access to. Only their files, only their calendar, only the device information in the organization, and nothing else. So it's very important to understand that in order to get access to the data, you need to follow this Auth 2.0 flow. And we have a set of libraries, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution of these libraries in a minute, that help you in the process of getting these access tokens, having a cache that keeps the record of the tokens for you for the given users, and helps you with the refreshing the tokens as well. The versions of the library are ADAL, which is Azure Active Directory Authentication Library, and MSAL, with its Microsoft Authentication Library. We are definitely going supporting ADAL going into the future, but our investments are into MSAL, which is the authentication library that supports both consumer and commercial accounts. I also wanted to talk a little bit about app permissions. So we talked about you need to get an access token, and you need a user to consent. And there's two ways into which you can access data into the organization. The first one is accessing on behalf of a user. This is when you're building single-page applications, web apps, mobile apps, or apps with a middle tier. And here, the effective permissions of the request are the delegated permissions to the app, the intersection of that with the user privileges, because your app is acting on behalf of a user. So if your app was given permissions to access messages, and I'm logging into the app, and I'm using that app, I'm only going to be able to see my messages. I'm not going to be able to see Jeremy's messages, right? Like, because that's the set of permissions that I have. So the effective permissions of the request are the intersection of both the delegated permissions to the app and the user privileges. And the second type is, and one thing that I forgot to mention, that users can consent to their own data, and administrators can consent for data across all of the organization. And the second type is getting access as a service. So here you're building a background process, a service, daemon, a type of application. And the effective permissions of the request here is what has been delegated to the app. So in this case, the app is not acting on behalf of a user. So if I give the app access to the mailboxes in the organization, it's going to be able to access all of the mailboxes in the organization. And of course, because this is a highly privileged set of permissions scopes, only administrators can consent to this type of permissions in the organization. Jeremy showed a little bit about the permission structure, but I wanted to also talk a little bit about that in terms of what is the format that we'll see on the registration portal. We have a resource, the resource that the permission applies to, whether it is users or notes or directory or files or calendars. Then the action, whether it's read, write, or created by app or read or things like that. And then the scope. If there's nothing after the read, then it is on the user scope, just for the user's information. If then there is a .all, it means across all of the organization. If it is a .shared, it means the data that the user has shared with somebody else, and so forth. So with that in mind, I'm going to go and do a demo of our new app registration portal. And we have, for some time, had two separate set of registration portals. One as part of the Azure portal, and the other one as part of apps.dev.microsoft.com. We've heard a lot of feedback around the confusion between the two. So we're fixing that, and we're consolidating all of the app registration portal within the Azure portal experience. And we've done a ton of work. The Azure Active Directory team has done a ton of work to improve the experience, and I'm just going to show some of that today. So first of all, I'm going to start with a new registration. Let's call it Demo App. And the next thing that it's going to ask me is, what type of accounts is your application targeting? So for those of you who are familiar with V1 and V2, there's no longer picking between V1 and V2. Just pick what type of account is your organization targeting, and then you can come back and change this after the fact if you change your mind or if the scope of your application increases. So let's say that this one will support both organizational directories and personal accounts, and we're going to register the application. And that's pretty much it, what you have to do. Now, the left-hand side navigation is ordered in a way that is going to give you like all of the different set of steps that you want to have for like creating your app, like adding additional information to the app, whether it is branding, authentication, creating your certificates and secrets, and all for that. And I'm going to go and check on the API permissions. It already has been configured to get access to the user's profile information, but I'm going to add a permission here. And this is another huge improvement that we've done. So there's a lot of the APIs that are part of Microsoft Graph, so you can start here with Microsoft Graph. And as I was explaining before, you're going to choose, like, is your application acting on behalf of a user, or is your application acting on its own, right? It's an app-only application. So I'm going to select delegated permissions. And what we used to have before was a very unordered list that you had to go and chase based on strings in order to match what the permissions were. So we're also changing that. And for example, if I come here to calendars or contacts, you know, I can see that's the resource, and these are all of the available permissions for this particular resource, right? So I can just select contacts.read, add those permissions to my app, and I'm done.
I see a few smiles in the audience. This is a tough crowd. Thank you. This drove me mad. So to have this like this is a big step up for those that haven't experienced this yet.
Ton of thanks to the Azure Active Directory team who's done a lot of work to improve this experience.
And then for the IT pros in the room, if you actually scroll down a little bit there, you'll see that now we've made it even easier to do the grant, revoke, admin consent screen. So no more guessing those horrible URLs. To work out how to send them to your IT pros. You can send them to your application inside this portal and get them to do the grants directly there if you choose to, which is a really nice addition as well.
Right. OK, so let's go back to the slides. So I already showed this a little bit, but we are working further on simplifying our developer platform. And the things that I'm going to talk about is around the auth stack. What we used to have is, like, you know, your application could have different target audiences, whether it is, you know, customers on-prem, customers in the Azure Active Directory and the cloud, Microsoft accounts, or even other set of identity providers out in the market. And we had V1 and V2 endpoints. The V1 endpoint only supporting Azure AD accounts, the V2 endpoint supporting a wider set of variety of accounts, 2 client libraries, and actually 3 different portal experiences to register an application that interacted with these client libraries. So we're simplifying all of that. And we are going into a world where we're going forward with investments on the V2 endpoint and the MSAL libraries. And one single portal where you can do all of these set of registration for the applications. That's the one that I just mentioned. One set of libraries, and as part of Ignite conference, we're announcing the availability in preview for the msal.js library that allows you to build browser-based applications. The endpoint itself, like whether you're a user or not, the libraries, the endpoint itself now supports both V1 and V2 tokens. So if you've built an application that, you know, is using the V1 stack, you can now call the V2 endpoint and get the tokens and complete your flow. So I think that's an important distinction to make, because you had to like choose the stack that you were doing beforehand. Alrighty, so when you talk about the authentication libraries, the going forward strategy is on MSAL. Of course, we're not going to abandon the ADA libraries, because we understand there's a lot of projects out there that are taking dependency on ADA. So ADA is going to continue to be there. Our recommendation, if you're starting new, then start with the Microsoft authentication libraries. The endpoint itself is production ready. The libraries, we're still iterating on them. So right now, we're announcing the preview for the, as I mentioned, the JavaScript library. The other set of libraries we expect to come within the next 3 to 6 months. And that's around all of the different set of platforms that we support. And of course, in order for us to get faster at this pace and all of these different things, we want your feedback. So like one thing that you can help us to get the things faster into market is use the libraries and give us feedback on what your experience is. Okay, so now we're going to get into the demo part of the session. But before we dive into it, I wanted to talk about one of the features that we are announcing for Ignite, which is Microsoft Data Connect. So if we take a look at all of the set of applications that Microsoft Graph has enabled so far, being a REST endpoint, there is a set of applications that are basically real time. You call the API, you get access to the data for what it is on that point in time. So it basically is real-time access to data. We have a standard consent model. I mentioned you need to get a token in order to get access to the data. And then we have all of the security and compliance that gives the fact that you are accessing that data in a protected way. Now, but there is a new set of pattern of applications that is emerging. It's a class of applications where you're doing insights and analytics around the data that you have in the organization. So we're enabling a new access pattern to the Microsoft Graph. We're enable, instead of like real-time access to a REST-based API, an HTTP-based API, we're enabling you to access that data at scale, where the data set, it's basically data set access rather than real-time API access. It allows you to have granular control on the set of data that you're moving, and it gives you security and governance around the data. So let me unpack that and explain what it means. There's a ton of data that we're generating day to day on Office 365, right? Like all of the calendar invites, all of the messages that are going back and forth, all of the contacts that are going in. And there's a great set of capability and tooling in Azure in order to process that data. Now, as a vendor today, if you wanted to like take data out of the Office 365 or Microsoft 365 and do post-processing of that data, you had to build a code that calls the APIs, takes that data out, and puts it somewhere else, whether that's Blob Store or Data Lake or some other place, right? And then after you're doing that, you're going to then do all of your code, machine learning, AI, cognitive services, and apply on that data in order to get the new set of insights, whatever it is that you're building. Well, we're building that pipeline for you, so that with no code, you can move data securely from Office 365 into Azure. Same things that I was mentioning before. It allows you to get access to data at scale. It allows you to get granular consent. So for example, if you want to do analysis on messages, but you only want to send over the send date and the recipients, you can granularly scope to that particular data. If you only want to say, I want the data from the finance department, or like for this set of users, or I want to exclude the executives in the company, you can do all of that with that level of granularity on the data pipeline that we're exposing. And then once the data is in Azure, you can join it with other data and use all of the tools that are available in Azure to do post-processing of that. We're starting with a set of Office 365 data sets around users, messages, calendar, events, mailbox settings, and contacts. Those are the ones that you're going to be able to start moving from with the Microsoft Data Connect into Azure. And basically what it happens is, look, you have, as I was explaining before, you have a customer, and this is the one that is on the left-hand side of the screen on the bottom, with the Microsoft 365 data. The red arrow is the pipeline that we're building for you, no code, right? It's going to move the data into Azure Data Lake. And for those of you who are not familiar with Azure Data Lake, it's basically blob storage plus next version. And once it is in there, you're going to be able to use all of the Azure tools available for machine learning, analytics, AI, to process that data and generate your own insights. Some of the use cases that we have for this is, for example, imagine that you, in your organization, are deploying a new set of trainings, and you want to know what is the efficiency of those trainings. Imagine it's around diversity and inclusion. And you want to know how the language has changed between how people communicated before and how people are communicating now that they've taken this training. You can do that analysis with this type of data. Imagine, for example, you want to create a repository of experts around the organization, around topics. We actually have a few partners that have been trying the product already who are doing this type of scenarios. So the key point here is not so much on like the end scenarios, because that's what you're bringing into the table, but the fact that you can securely move that data from Office 365 into Azure. And the thing that I forgot to mention here was that it's within the organizational boundary, right? So we're going to see a demo of it.
So this is an example of something just to highlight, and what I'll do is I'll show the demo first, and then I'll show you kind of how this is configured. So the expertise finding aspects is actually something that we see quite a lot of, and SharePoint has always had this notion of collecting skills into profiles where you can do those types of things. But what this is actually doing is if I'm looking for a cloud ETL expert, what it's doing is it's using that data that's gone through this entire pipeline, through the Data Connect, and it's responding here that there's a strong connection I have as Emily Braun here with Adam, and I can go through and see that information and scroll down, and not only can I see who else Adam is connected to here, but how I'm connecting to them through that connection. And if I select Adam here, you'll see on the right-hand side of this application, it's showing the information to go contact them.
So this is a combination of using the REST APIs to get that contact information, and then in the back end, like all of these additional relationships are being calculated using Data Connect and Azure. And this is one of the scenarios that are possible by having that data and the ability of doing post-processing of that data in Azure.
So this screen is a little bit noisy, so I've tried to zoom it as hard as I can, just so I can still operate the UI for these on the screen there. But essentially, the way this works in the Data Connect factory is what the Microsoft Graph actually is, and thank you, Jackson, is when I go in and have a look at the connections here, if I uncheck this, I will see the list of data sets that are available. So as Yina mentioned, you can see here we have the contacts, the events, the mail folders, the mailbox settings, the sent items, and the user objects. So if you wanted to go build a data set based on everybody's job titles and their locations and their departments, you can easily configure this data factory to ship those attributes out to wherever you want them to be shipped. I was like, why mailbox settings? That doesn't really make sense. There's a lot of mailbox settings that adds a lot of context around the time zone that user's in, where they're located, what kind of OOF messages, out of office messages they're sending, and so forth. And there's a lot of stuff that we use internally to do some of the presentations we do against our own data analytics that we've productized. And so this is where you can do the same thing with those data sets, and it's something that we'll continue to do. And the reason notifications are showing is because I'm doing a notifications demo in a moment. In addition to that, once the data is kind of connected from the graph and it's scheduled to be optimized to pull out of those graph data sets when your tenant is not as busy, it'll drop it into, in this instance, an Azure Blob Storage, but you can move it into other storage locations within your own Azure resources as well. And just to try to show you what that looks like, if I look at the blob here and then go in and edit the blob, essentially what that's doing is it's pulling all those objects out into JSON. So you can see here, there's the IDs, here's all the information that's being pulled through about every single mail message here with all the different attributes that have been selected. And again, as you mentioned, you can be as broad or as narrow as you like on the data set that's outputted, depending on whether it's your own enterprise devs that are accessing this data, or maybe you've got a vendor and you don't want to kind of give them everything. You only want to maybe give them the subject line and a summary of the emails that are going on.
Two key things. I had to write no code in order to move this data from Office 365 into Azure. And two, when the data is moved, it remains within the customer's security and compliance boundary. So I'm not moving this data, if I am an ISV, I'm not moving this data from the customer's Azure subscription into my subscription. The data is kept on the customer's Azure subscription.
And then once that information is in that blob storage, that export has happened into it, we're essentially running Databricks across that. And this is a Python script that essentially goes and extracts all of the different subjects that it finds and the commonalities in the email messages and the subject lines. And that's how it's building kind of the expertise finder, where if I type in cloud ETL, all that information is dropped into, in this instance, a Cosmos DB, and my end application, when it does these queries, is doing a Gremlin graph query against that Cosmos DP. So there's a few steps in that process. Talking to people on the booth yesterday, they're doing this manually right now, where they're thrashing the Graph API, they're hitting all the throttling that we put in place to kind of protect the service. This is an alternate way of doing that if you're trying to build something that doesn't have to be real time, where you want to get at that data maybe on a daily refresh, where you can now go through this pipeline but still maintain that data in your own Azure resources, but in a controlled way through this supported approach of the Data Connect features of the Microsoft Graph.
The other thing is that your code then it will execute eyes off when it is being deployed in the customer's tenant, right? Like we're using managed applications. So as a managed application, you'll deploy your code, and it will execute on customer's tenant without you necessarily having access. Now, customer can also grant you access to that data, but that's a way where you can do all of these post-processing without necessarily having that accountability.
Okay, so for the next demo, we've tried to wrap up everything into one particular environment. And so for people that are out there, we see a lot of work being done now with Microsoft Flow, and there's some great people out in the community that have documented how you can have the Microsoft Flow events called directly into the Microsoft Graph. And we kind of stood on the shoulders of giants like John Liu, who actually kind of got all this working, and rather than blogging tweets in a series of tweets, how to do the steps. And one of the things we wanted to do was this Contoso Airlines scenario. So we have this notion of when a SharePoint list item is created. So for those that are familiar with SharePoint, SharePoint's a great way to have a UI where you can do data entry. Also Power Apps is too, that sits on top of that. And essentially we've got an event here where when a item is created into a flight list, what we're doing is we're just doing a bit of massaging on the data from the user objects that come through, and then we're actually going to call into an Azure function with a bunch of the properties that have been collected by the end user in that SharePoint list creation. Now, the magic here is, if I go over to my Microsoft Flow, and in the top, we've got these custom connectors. And inside of these custom connectors, we can actually define connections off to a Azure function call using an open API definition to pull out all of the different methods that we're running inside this Azure function. So you can see here we have three. If I go back to general just very quickly, there is the web app that we're running inside of Azure, which is running the Azure functions. And then in my definitions here, you can see that I have this create flight team function, which we're actually going to run through, and I'll show you in the code all the new APIs that we're calling. But as part of that, we're posting to that function a request body, and there are a variety of those functions that is pulled through, and all that's sucked into this flow configuration using that Swagger definition from that Azure function.
Open API.
Swagger, Open API. Old habits die hard, you know. And once, obviously, the trigger of the flight admin has created the list item, so I'm just going to go in here and just say it's Contoso Airlines, and it's flight number 1. The admin is going to be the admin itself. And we've got some pilots that we're going to be putting on this plane, so hopefully, because you can't really fly a plane without pilots just yet. We're going to add Brian as one of the flight attendants. And then sadly, I am the caterer for this flight, which is probably better than the food I had on the plane on the way over from Seattle on Sunday. But you'll notice, if you're very acute, that there is a demo Gmail account there. We now provide access through the API to add guest accounts into Microsoft Teams, where essentially they can just sign in with their Gmail account. It associates a Microsoft account in the background to it and allows them to access Microsoft Teams directly, which is a really neat feature to be able to do via the API. And then if I kind of say that we're going to fly back on Friday and click Save.
You need the departure gate.
Thank you. So we're going to have A1 because that's just the best gate ever. And then when I click Save, that's going to create that. It will, if I go over to the flow, say that now there is an active flow that's in place that's running, and that would have triggered my Azure function and gone through and creating that team. Now, if I come over to the team site and do a refresh here, what you will see is that that flight will be available. Why that's doing, you can see flight 1 has actually been created. If I go into general, you'll notice that right now we have a pilots channel that's just been created, and there's going to be a few other channels that get created as well. But if I force click in here flick between them quickly, you'll notice that if I refresh the screen, that what it's also given me in Flight 1 is when I go to the pilots and the flight attendants, that the members of those channels are different, but it must be still executing it. So while it's doing that, I'm going to... Okay, I'm going to show you the code while it's doing that. Or I can just show you, there you go. Is that it's creating an additional tab here. So that's a new API that we've introduced into Teams. Allows you to create a tab. In this instance, we're also creating a SharePoint custom list with a bunch of columns. And so we have some challenging passengers on board this flight. In flight seat A, they keep asking for more snacks. Obviously, you didn't know about this before we came on stage. And then in addition to that, we've added a tab for a planner, which has also had an appropriate set of tasks created via the API as well. So what I'm trying to kind of highlight here is that there's a bunch of things now you can do in the API with Microsoft Teams, like adding apps that are pre-configured directly into Teams using the Microsoft Graph API, because ultimately Teams sits on top of Groups and has a bunch of services like SharePoint and Planner and OneDrive and so stuff associated with it. So to show that better, if I go into Postman here, when you create a Postman, and obviously we're going to do a post to our Azure function and kind of beat flow to it, I'm running this locally on my machine. You just select the OAuth2 endpoint here and click Get Access Token. These settings essentially come from your Azure AD portal settings. And when I do request token, Postman is actually going to log me in. So I'm going to log in as that user I was demoing as when I executed my Microsoft Flow. And when I do that, I'm accepting the different permissions that I use for this demo. And I have to scroll down here and just click Use Token. And in the body of my content, essentially I'm mimicking what the flow does for me in the background. And so I'll just do a flight number 2 here and click Send. And then that's going to jump straight into my code. And the first thing of note here, and we will be open sourcing this project, is that ultimately what we're doing is when we do this via Postman and Microsoft Flow, we're getting an access token as the logged in user of the SharePoint site that creates the list item. The list item triggers the call of Microsoft Flow, and that's what's getting passed through as the context of how the flow is executing. And then what we can actually do is when we jump into this code is we can see, if I just scroll through here, that we're then going to ask for, on behalf of that user access token, an additional access token for the Microsoft Graph. Once we have that access token, okay, and there is one little thing with Postman where that didn't actually do the access token properly. So if I do this quickly again, the trick to it is once you get the token back, is to delete the one that's expired and then roll down here and click Use and then run it again. And then once you have that access token, without the error happening, it'll jump in and start creating that group for me. Hopefully. No. One more go. And once it's got that, it'll jump through the code and start to create that group with the Microsoft Graph here. And if this doesn't work, I'm just going to manually go through running the code. There we go, we've got an access token this time. And so we're going to create the group first. And the trick with the group is that we need to provide the owners and the members when we do that group creation. And so we need to go get the IDs of the individual users first. And then once we have that and we've created our group here with all the information about what we want the display name to be, whether we want it to be private, whether it's mail enabled, again, the members and owners collections lists, we're actually going to go through and create that group. And so, as I mentioned before, we don't have an SDK for the beta endpoint. All of these demos is going against beta for now because it's just easier for us to demo with one flow. But you can see here we're doing a post because we're creating an entity as a group. And we're just calling groups, we're posting that strongly typed JSON object through as part of that graph call. And so that will go away and actually go and create that group. Now in this demo sample that we've got, you'll be able to see all those calls coming through, what it's posting through, and how it's coming back. Now once we've created the group, one thing we're able to do is go and create a Microsoft team conversation in here. And so you can see here that we're posting through into the team ID, which is the same as the group ID, into the channel that we've created, which was the pilots channel, and we're posting it as a chat thread, and then we're posting the thread object through, which has the message that I've got. So when I run that there, that's going to go and create that message directly into the team channel. And then in addition to that, we have a team app ID for the Poly app that we're going to go and add automatically and provision it into that team. So again, when I just look at this, all we're simply doing is a post to teams with that team ID to the apps collection for the team with that app ID that we picked for the Poly aspect. And so the calls are really simple to go do these provisionings across this, all using that one access token that in this case we posted through with Postman, which has consented the permissions to be able to do all these particular things on the graph. Now, again, we've got this ability to go through, and a new feature here with OneDrive is the ability to copy files from one location to another. So I have a flight log document that lives in a parent SharePoint site collection, and I'm actually going to copy that directly into the site that's associated with that Microsoft team. And so that's going to go away and do that. And then with the plans, we're actually going to go and create a flight plan here where if I just jump into this code, we're doing a bunch of things to create some buckets. So we're creating a bucket called to-dos against that plan ID, as well as a completed bucket. And then you can see here we're just making very simple calls to go create those buckets and create those planned tasks. Again, all using that one flow inside of the Azure functions. Now, as well as being able to create the plans, we can also add the tab. And so the way that that works for the planner is that we get the group ID, we jump in here. Again, it's just a post. We're doing against the Teams ID. We're going to add the tab to a particular channel. With that channel ID we have the tabs collection, and then we're passing in the tabs URLs for all the planner sections in there. So it's a great way of explaining or adding additional application functionality into your team. Maybe if you shipped a web application and you want to pin it into a particular team in a programmatic way. And then as well as being able to add tabs now in Teams on the beta endpoint, the other side of it that you can do is we can actually go and create SharePoint lists directly, and while that's working on the adding a tab, again, some of these beta APIs are a little bit slower than what you would expect on the V1s. But when that comes back, you'll see that just to kind of show you how easy it is from a SharePoint list perspective, I'm just creating a structured JSON here where I'm giving the name of the list. I'm creating these site definition columns with all of text with the seat numbers and the notes, and I'm going to go and call that SharePoint list, and it's as you would expect. We can come in here and see sites, the site ID, the list collection, and that's the JSON object that defines the list that then it goes and calls that against the SharePoint APIs. So a lot easier than those SharePoint schema XML files you had to build. And then in addition to that, we're also announcing this week the ability to go create SharePoint pages. So I can go through here, and not only can I create the page with the file names and the titles and the web parts I want to include as a collection of web parts on the page. And in this case, I'm just adding a very standard list view web part to that list we created. We can then just call that, and as you would expect, it's against the site with that particular AP on the pages endpoint of the graph where you pass that JSON packet through. So it's super straightforward to get those things working through this code. And again, we're going to share this sample later today on GitHub. And so hopefully that gives you a good idea about the different things we've introduced on the API from a beta endpoint across a variety of different products. We have a bunch of sessions that we're going to show that goes into more detail. And so one of the things we wanted to highlight with this was how we can show what people have built with this online. And sorry, we're having lots of problems with the slides today for some reason.
Oh, they're not coming through.
Let me do that, and you can introduce Victor.
Yeah, so one of the things that we want to do is to make sure that we're not only showing you demo code, but also give you the opportunity to hear from one of our partners who's been developing with the Microsoft Graph. So we have Victor on the stage today. Victor, thank you for joining us, from Avanet, who's going to share some of the projects that Avanet has been doing with integrating with the API.
Yep. Thank you, Gina.
And so what types of things have you been building on the graph, Victor? Like how has that been working at Avanade for you?
Yeah, so
it is working.
It's working, cool. Yeah, so we've been using Graph for quite some time. It's been changed the way how we can actually build modern workplace solutions and helping our clients getting the data out of Office 365 and Microsoft 365. And currently we are engaging ourselves, trying to improve our own workplace experience by building our new digital hub, using specifically the insights endpoints of the graph to help our users get back to work much faster, finding the recent sites, the recent documents, but also integrating to things that they need to do, like the planner tasks, your to-do tasks, etc. So you can get back to work much faster.
And this is one of the screenshots here where you're going to really show.
This is one of the screenshots of our new digital hub that we are currently rolling out internally.
And then in addition to that, like you've got this ability to have all these quick links and metrics. How are you providing that to the employees? Like what's your flow there?
Yes, so what we thought was that Microsoft Graph is a cool idea, right? So why don't we build our own graph? We have a lot of countries with their own HR and payroll systems, etc. So we're building our own graph internally and mimicking exactly how you do with the graph. But using Azure AD as the authentication authorization model, building out our own endpoints for different kind of payroll systems, etc. So we can aggregate data for all our consultants all around the world to make a seamless experience, but also making this Avanade graph available so we can add more features going forward. And I'm glad that you're just adding the Office Dynamics 365 interfaces, for instance, but those are the kind of things we want to add here as well.
And so I imagine with Microsoft Graph Data Connect, that would be another layer that you can start using.
Absolutely, I'm super excited about that Data Connect and how we can do that to give even more insights about our specific corpus of data that we have internally.
And then in addition to that, we notice you have this new ADA bot. How are you handling that with your customers?
Yes, and that is also the same kind of thing. We have the digital hub, you saw that, which is based on SharePoint, but not all users live in SharePoint all the day, right? So they might be in Microsoft Teams or using other kind of tools. So we have created a bot that essentially shows you the same kind of information, or you can ask for the same kind of information. Your tasks and what you're doing, you can update your information, you're out of the office, etc., but also getting your tickets from ServiceNow. So we have that bot living in a web page, but also we have a universal web app for that and looking to integrate into Microsoft Teams and other kind of canvases as well. So you always have access to your Microsoft 365 data wherever you are. And
so that's just connecting straight through to the graph and responding those things?
Yeah, so we're using Azure Function. This is some parts are actually going directly to the graph, but some things we use Azure Functions, protected with Azure AD, to aggregate data or do more complex queries.
That's great. Well, I appreciate being able to come up here in person and explain those things briefly. If you're not following Victor in the community, you're doing something wrong. He continues to blog for many years now on this stuff, and he's always sharing things. So a big thanks for coming on stage to share that today.
Thanks, Jeremy and Gina.
Cheers, buddy. Thanks, man. Okay, and then one thing I did want to flick to was we also have another demo before we kind of wrap up here, which I omitted. And I'm hoping that Postman plays nice here, where essentially we have the ability, so I'm just going to pick that new access token and hope that it picks it up, where we can actually provide notifications. And I'm just going to log into that device. And so what this allows me to do is I can notify of a flight change. So again, you can see my access token.
You're showing Postman on the...
Yeah, it's okay. I can see that I've posted this here, and essentially what it's going to allow me to do, and I'm using an open extension to go get the group ID from the SharePoint list where we first created that list item using open extensions here. And then once I've got the group ID, it'll go through, and then what I'm actually going to do is call this send notifications API. And what this allows me to do is send a toast, not just to their logged in Windows account, but to other locations as well. So if I flick over to our wonderful screen here, what you will see is that when I F5 this, that's going to go away and show me a call. And you'll see that subtly on the Android device, that I've now got this notification at the top here, which is the flight to gate change has occurred. But if I flick back quickly to my Windows machine here, and the reason I had notifications on is that I've also got that notification here. Now, the real benefit of these notifications is if I close that notification, maybe I'm working on my PC, and I quickly flick back into my device here, after a little bit of time, it's not instant, so this demo can often be a bit like, come on, this needs to go away, is that that notification will actually disappear directly on this machine. So rather than having me as an end user frustratingly go, I've already done this on my desktop machine, it'll automatically clear those notifications on all the devices where that user is authenticated. And any second now, that will show that disappearing. Trust me, it does work. We just had some, there has been some delays with the Wi-Fi here. But the notification system is super easy because it's basically just doing that whack me, whack notifications, and then you can post whatever messages you want that roams across all those different machines. And so in the presence of time, I'm not going to wait for that thing to switch back. So we'll just jump back to the slide deck here. And Gina, you want to wrap up with what the next steps are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope you have enjoyed the session that we have prepared for you today. There's a ton of content that we have online. So if you want to get started with Microsoft Graph, as I mentioned, graph.microsoft.com is the place to go. We have the Graph Explorer, which we briefly showed, and a lot of you have already played with. There's a set of tutorials that we have given platforms, so like go on in your own platform of choice, go through the tutorials. We have all of them available in GitHub as well on github.com/MicrosoftGraph. We have our community calls, and I showed you how to go and get those community calls into your calendar right away. So like just as you get out of the room, that's the first thing that you got to go and do. And then join us every month on the community calls, and you'll keep getting more and more of the information and set of samples of things that people are doing with the graph. And then we're going to be here for the entire week on the Expo booth. There's a ton of sessions as well that we have listed, so where you can take pictures of that. If you want to engage with us, we are on Twitter, which has with the hashtag Microsoft Graph. We're also on our GitHub organization is /Microsoft Graph, as I mentioned. For questions, like send it us over on Stack Overflow, tag them with Microsoft Graph. And for the remaining of the week, we have several sessions available.
Oh, sorry.
There's a set of, I think total there's like more than 30 or 40 sessions that are covering topics related to Microsoft Graph, and that are going to go into way more detail than what we did today during the demos.
And I will post these on my Twitter handle, jthake, because there's a lot of information here, but this is like a nice way of being able to see all the Graph sessions. In your app, the MS Events app, you can do a search for Microsoft Graph, but a few of these I would call out as key is the Intelligent Platform one, which is the 3289, which is the Microsoft Graph Data Connect session. So the demo we did around pulling the data out, they're going to go into a lot more detail in that session. And then there is a deeper dive in a theater session on Data Connect as well, in the theater section there too. So I will post these up just because these slides won't be available to you immediately after this session. But that's just where I would go with that. And then just to quickly show you.
There's one more demo.
Yeah, there is one more demo. And originally with this demo, I was going to use Yina's phone. The notification has disappeared up the top here. Wait. But it gets better. Yina wouldn't let me borrow her phone for this demo. So in Intune now, we actually have the ability to do all the capabilities of Intune through the graph. And so this is an example where the Intune UI is actually using the graph. So as you click through all those Azure Portal configurations, it's using the Graph API calls to do that. And so this gives me the ability that I can actually go through and look at all the managed devices for a particular user, and in this instance, remote lock. Now with Yina, I did propose actually erasing her phone entirely using the Intune remote wipe. But if I go over to 3 here,
I was not going to agree to that.
You'll see here that that device is currently running. And when I click Run Query in Graph Explorer, hopefully it doesn't take as long as the remote wipe. But I can be navigating on this device all I like. Hypothetically, this could be a flight attendant's phone that she's left on a plane or he's left on a plane. And it will actually automatically remote lock that phone that will require me then to use my password. And with magic, please don't let this.
Demo gods.
No. Okay, the demo. Oh no, hang on. This is why.
It's a post.
It's a post, not a get. There you go. I got caught by my own magic. I feel like.
Hocus pocus, abracadabra. There you go.
Right?
No.
And so now, when I come back in, it's actually going to force me to lock that phone. So that scenario opens up all sorts of things that you can do by calling this graph to, from a security perspective, maybe geolocate where the flight attendant is and realize that you need to lock that phone to force that. So there's a lot of power in Intune from that facility as well. So I did want to get that demo in because we have spent a bit of time getting that working. And shame on you for not letting me use your iPhone.
To wipe it out. Alrighty, well, thank you so much for spending this time with us today. I hope you have good takeaways in terms of like what the API has to offer across all of these different products. We showed demos that integrate with Teams, with SharePoint, with Planner, with Intune, with a ton of features across all of the different set of products that are a part of Microsoft 365, not just the standard things that we usually show. So we're going to publish the code in GitHub in the Microsoft Graph organization as a sample that you can then take a look at and take a peek at deeper into the code. And find us in the booth throughout the week. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Ina. And thank you to Jason Johnson for helping with the all-up demo. That was awesome.
Yes.
Working with a beta product is also extremely hard running up to Ignite. So big thank you to Jason for helping build the code for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.